right, welcome. We are thrilled that you could join us for this important discussion today about the impact of COVID-19 on counseling and student success. It's drawing from the survey that we recently conducted with School Counselor Central. My name is Stephen Smith. I'm co-founder and CEO of Intellispark. At Intellispark, we're committed to building innovative technology to help counselors and other educators know the name, face, and story of every kid. Our goal today is to encourage a really engaging conversation. And if you're joining via Zoom, please submit questions via the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. If you're joining via Facebook Live, feel free to submit questions in the comments. Two of my colleagues will be assisting the panel and me in organizing questions, and we'll do our best to hit as many topics as we can. They'll also occasionally push out information via the chat, such as the Twitter handles for each of our panelists and for us, so that you can follow them and us after the event. The webinar is being recorded, and for those who've registered, we'll send around an email afterward with the link. It'll also be available via the School Counselor Central Facebook page and on Intellispark's Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook accounts. And with that housekeeping stuff out of the way, I'd like to move on to our great panel. And I'm going to start by asking Derek, Kat, Anna, and Matt to introduce themselves briefly and tell us a little bit about the schools and districts where they work. So Derek, can you kick us off?
Yeah, first, thanks for having me, and I'm glad to be on this panel with the other counselors on here. My name is Derek Francis. I'm the manager of counseling services for Minneapolis Public Schools. We have about 100 school counselors and college and career center coordinators, and we support students in the Minneapolis area. And our district is one of the 3 largest districts. It's the most diverse district racially, and it's a position I've been in for about a year and a half. And so that's what I do. I also support Hatching Results with consulting for school counselor professional development. So that's my roles.
Terrific. Thanks, Derek. How about you, Anna?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Anna Duval. I am the director of counseling at a large high school in South Carolina. Now, I call large about 2,200 students. Some of y'all might not call that large, but in our state, that's pretty good size. I have been a school counselor for a long time. I will not tell you how long, but the light is near at the end of the tunnel. So just thrilled to be here tonight and looking forward to hearing everyone else on the panel as well.
Terrific. Thanks. How about you, Kat?
Here in Arizona, Anna, is still afternoon, so I'll start with good afternoon and good evening to everyone. Arizona is one of those weird states that never changes time, and we're always confused on what time it is everywhere else. So I'm a school counselor, department chair at Flagstaff High School in Flagstaff, Arizona. We're about 2.5 hours north of Phoenix, Arizona, and we also border the Navajo Nation. So if you're following things that are going on in the news, you can imagine what we are facing here in northern Arizona. We are a high school. We used to be a high school of around 1,700 students, and with enrollment dropping this year, we're currently around 1,550 students. We also have a BIE dormitory where we have about 180 students usually that live in a residential dorm from the Navajo and Hopi nations with us. So that's some interesting dynamics. And I too feel like I have been in school counseling for a really long time, but I still feel like sometimes it's my first year. So happy to join Matt and Derek and Anna. I know them from all aspects of school counseling, and just an honor to be with all of you today.
Terrific. Thanks. And Matt?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Matt Liberatore, and I echo everybody else's sentiment that it's a real honor to be on this panel with these rock stars. My role is Director of Professional Learning and Student Services at District 214. District 214 is about 45 minutes out of downtown Chicago. It's past the airport. We're a little different. We have 7 high schools. It's a high school only school district, 6 comprehensive high schools and 1 specialized high school. And we are the largest high school district in the state of Illinois at 12,000 students. We serve about 45 school counselors across the schools. And then my other role is I'm past president of the Illinois School Counseling Association and served as president last year. And I'm also senior advisor for Intellispark and have worked on the platform. So really happy to be here.
Well, thank you all for sharing that background, and I'm excited to get this kicked off. And we had a conversation last week to prepare for this, and I encouraged all the panelists to just think about how we could have this as sort of open conversation where people are engaging one another. So I'm going to do my best to try to ask a probing question and then step back and hopefully watch how the conversation evolves, and also encourage those of you watching at home to join the conversation again by asking your questions through the Q&A. But we're going to start really big picture and just ask, what's the biggest hurdle that schools are facing around the country now as a result of COVID-19? Does anybody want to start? Oh, I know you're not shy.
I can start. I think one of the biggest hurdles is, I know the big word is adapt and pivot and all these different words. And I think it's just the uncertainty. I think as soon as educators are passionate and good-hearted people, and just as they come up with a plan, things change, and the plan is really scrapped and has to be, started from square one. And so I think there's a little bit of fatigue when it comes around really having to constantly change things up and still do it with fidelity and keep that passion going, right? Because at the end of the day, everybody got into this because they wanted to change lives and hopefully help students' lives. And so I think sometimes, that's losing focus right now because of all the planning and all the logistics and all the changing. That's just kind of that's on the higher level. And I'll let somebody else speak to the social emotional piece of that and just the fatigue that way.
Matt, I think that's really interesting because I've been having several leadership team meetings with our administration on it, school level administration and then district level administration. And what's really eye-opening is what's on everybody's plates and what as everybody's priorities. Because when you talk about a school counselor's priority versus a building principal's priority, right now, I don't think they're necessarily matching up because of the pivoting and replanning, going back to hybrid learning, back to remote learning. Okay, now we're going to come up with a different schedule. Now we're going to come up with a different plan. And what's really interesting is that we're still underfunded. Every school across the United States is still underfunded, but now they have added an obscene amount of tasks that need to be done on top of educating students every single day. And now I think schools are also charged with making sure that students have internet, that students have a device, that students are getting fed even if they're not coming or don't have transportation to get to the schools to get those meals, that students are receiving mental health and social emotional wellness and all of those types of things without not necessarily getting the funding that they needed for that to be happening. And so I think, if someone could get a bigger plate, I think they would, so that they could fit more stuff on it. But the plate is still the same size. And I feel like now things are falling off the plate because you can't make room for all of it. Derek, and I don't know if you're experiencing that in where you're at.
Yeah, as I hear you all sharing, it's the question hit me so hard where I said the biggest hurdle, and as you were sharing, Kat, the hurdles that you share are systemic. And that's what, and the other thing I think about is that was a whole nother pandemic before this pandemic happened. The systemic racism and microaggressions and things that students have been feeling once devices were starting to get rolled out. They started to feel like, oh wait, I don't have a device. And the kids were feeling like, wait, and I think there's a gap where staff were like, well, we thought everyone had a device at home. And so I think some of those things, realizing how the pandemic hits so differently based off of your how you were doing prior, were you marginalized prior? And so imagining our students, and you look at the data, we looked here in Minneapolis, we're in Minneapolis proper, and our students, 66% of our district students of color. And so knowing that that's the area hardest hit by job loss. Our families of color, that's the area hardest hit by who's getting COVID. And so I think some of those systemic things where the family was like, oh my goodness, we're just drained from all the other things we're dealing with. It's hard to even do education right now because our basic needs, we have people that are dying left and right. So I think our kids that are marginalized, they're struggling with this pandemic way differently than our students and families that have some of those basic necessities like internet and their own bedroom to do schoolwork in. So we got to remember the school environment now is in our students and families' homes. And so all the things they were navigating, it's coming into the school, seeing it at their house. And so it's really, those are the things we're seeing our country, the realness of how struggle's been happening. And it's been eye-opening, even for myself. I'm like, wow, our students are navigating this harder than I haven't had the same struggles that they've had throughout COVID. And that's privilege that I have to be aware of. I have an internet. I'm getting a check every 2 weeks, and I'm working from home comfortable. Some of our students and families, to talk about school when they're trying to just survive, it's hard. So that's one of the things I think makes it a big hurdle, is how do we support students when they're trying to survive? And so seeing it at that level, I think it's one of the things we have to do as educators. I'll stop there.
Well, and Derek, I'd like to kind of piggyback on that with what we're seeing here. It's almost like, I mean, the gap's getting bigger. If there are parents at home who can support the students' education, then those students are getting what they need, or what we can offer them. My school is students are face-to-face for 2 days and then virtual for 3, or they're virtual all 5 days. But just up the road, I have a school district where they're face-to-face every day. So they have more opportunity to see the students, to work with the students, have that connection with them. The connection we're losing by not seeing students every day, I don't think we're going to be able to measure that. And I think we're going to see an impact from that for a long time to come, not just socially, emotionally, academically, I mean, everything.
So, I mean, a number of you had mentioned how the pandemic is really changing and adding to the responsibilities that you have. And I'm just curious if you could maybe elaborate a little bit more on what's been added to counselors' plates in particular. And we've also had a question come in from attendees who are looking, also for some guidance. Like, they know that a lot of this work is important. Like, obviously students are facing additional challenges, and we're all motivated to try to step in and support them. At the same time, like, there is a breaking point. So, like, how do we make sure that we don't break our staff at the same time that we try to meet the needs of our kids?
Steve, I think Derek and I in our circle that we have been a part of with these different conversations have had that conversation. And I think it stems back to the counseling program and not the counselor, right? So like pastor, counselor at Flagstaff High School, if I leave Flagstaff High School, my expectation is that counseling program still exists in its shape and form as it is now. It's really not about the people, it's about the program itself. But what I find super interesting right now is like stuff happens and everyone just throws out what they've been doing. And I think I go back to sports. I'm like, if you got to the championship game, are you going to change what you did to get yourself there? Right. And I think about that with counseling, and I think about the person who asked that question. It's like, then why are school counselors being asked to do different things that they weren't being asked to do the year before? And I go back to like, why? Is there a need at your school that is not being addressed? And then whoever's making the decision decides that the school counselors would be the best suited to meet that need. And it's like fair share responsibility, right? So if everybody in the building does something, the school counselor should also do part of that as well. But I really think it comes back to your comprehensive school counseling program. And how informed is your program to the people who make decisions in your school building, right? Derek, I know you've talked about that a lot with, do the building administrators understand and know how to use their school counselors? And then do the school counselors know how to advocate for themselves to say, here's how we can help with this, better suited than maybe making all these truancy phone calls, for example.
I'm glad you shared that, because I think as you coming back to at the beginning of the year, having that set in your counselor principal agreement. And I think that gives you as a school counselor opportunities for boundaries, but then for leadership. And so I think the role of school counselor right now in our work is how can we get the pulse of what students need? And so that's ongoing, and understanding it from a trauma lens that all of us are going through something. All of us, even me, my life looks different. Oh my goodness. And it's been tough and challenging. So how can you have a pulse of that? And in your role of leadership in your building, say, you know what, admin, my goal is to feel it out, see what people are needing. But not only that, knowing that the staff in your school building, there's been more staff reaching out to counselors who want to talk and connect as well. So helping with that kind of leadership skill to say, and grounding us to say, some districts might be really heavy on the academics right now. What's going on with graduation rates? What's happening here? Why aren't students? Then as school counselors, we can bring them back and say, yeah, we understand that, but we're all in some trauma right now. It's not normal right now. So we can't keep trying to go on as if it's normal. You got to know it's going to be a little different. Let's pause and attend to the humanness of our students and our staff, because it's applying so much more pressure to students and staff and families if we don't, and they're going through a lot. So I think that's something school counselors can do as leaders, to take on that emotional well-being for the entire building. So I'm glad that you brought up how we can be comprehensive in doing that work.
And I think to add to that, and not to go in a different direction, but to go on the systems theory piece of that, is when you start to see things coming up and you're triaging and, putting a Band-Aid on things, you really have to look at the system. I mean, we were in a leadership meeting yesterday all day long with 100 district leaders talking about grading practices. And the report card of today looks as the same as the report card from 100 years ago. So how can we leverage this moment right now to be creative and, change everything up, flip it upside down on its head, and actually, change the system so that you're not sitting there triaging and having inefficient use of time. And you're really looking to how can you find the students that are being successful?
One of my colleagues said at the beginning of school year that we had turned into the search and rescue team. It was like we were trying to find the students that we didn't know where they were. Now, that was not solely a counseling responsibility. The whole school was involved, but that's what it felt like. We just didn't even know where they were, or what resources they need, what supports they need. I agree with Matt. This is a perfect time to be able to educate, leverage all that stuff for us to be able to move into more of what we were trained to do. But I feel like we're in reaction mode 24/7, and it is very hard to get out in front of it. We're trying. I'm speaking Anna. I am trying to get out in front of it, but it's really difficult because you don't know what's coming your way.
Can we dig into that a little bit more? Because I think this is interesting. Obviously it's a time where there's a lot of things that are happening. A lot of those things are bad. Some things may also be an opportunity. And so, it's, just as you're indicating, I'm wondering if this is a way for us in the profession to really kind of make a step change in terms of relations between counseling and instruction, or counseling and administration. For years, we've been talking about this progression from guidance counseling to school counseling. This is potentially an opportunity to assert some leadership. So I'm just curious how you guys think about that.
I had been working on a state level committee over the summer, and it shocked me at the people in higher positions that didn't realize that school counselors were trained counselors. They wanted to bring maybe some social workers in, they're wonderful, or bring some mental health in from outside, they're wonderful, but they didn't realize that they already had people in the building who could do that. People that they're already paying, they've already done our benefits package, we're already here. So if they could just take some of the other responsibilities off of us, we were already there and we were ready to go. I found that very disheartening. I also found that if we tried to do the perfect 250 to 1 counselor to student ratio, there are not enough people coming through our programs to get certified to help. So that was something else that I was very disappointed in. I kind of knew it, but really over the summer, it really came home when we said, okay, we will need 100 new positions, but there's not 100 people out there to fill the positions. So I thought that was very interesting.
I think where I'm at with that, and I don't know if this necessarily fits in or makes sense with this, but it's gotten me thinking about what Anna just was saying. But it's like, what narrative what narrative are we talking right now? Because it seems like super negative, right? From a student perspective, like I look at my phone, I'm looking at everything, and like all of this bad stuff is happening. I've been ripped from my school system. I can't go see my students. Like, we haven't been back in school since March 13th. And I wonder, Anna, with that piece of like, we've always known that we've always had to fight. School counselors have always had to fight and advocate for what school counselors do. We always kind of compare it like, well, social studies teachers don't have to fight. People know what teachers mostly do. And so I think it comes back to that why, but it's like, how do we help change that narrative to help shine the light on some of the good that is happening and some of the good work that is coming out of what school counselors are doing and how they are helping to bridge those gaps in our schools? Because I'm not a student right now, and I'm a colleague, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm all these things, and it is so easy to get plugged into like the negative and the despair. And it's really hard right now to actually look for what's good going on. And I wonder what our students are hearing. And then I wonder what everybody else is hearing from school counselors. Like, are they hearing us complaining and hearing how hard it is? Are they hearing like the success stories of like what we are doing and how we are going door to door, trying to find that student to see where they're at? And I just, I always just think about the tone of the narrative that's being said right now. And that's what made me think about what you were saying right now. Like, how do you advocate in a way where it doesn't seem like you're complaining about what you're doing? And then how do we let people know, our students and our parents, about what role we play in our school and how we can facilitate and help bridge that gap or remove that roadblock or things of that nature?
I wanted to add to what you said too, because I'm so glad you shared, because if there's one thing that we all take away from this today as school counselors, is this is a chance for us to show our worth. Because you got to imagine now, our country as a collective has gone through trauma. And we're going to be going back into buildings. If you're not in one yet, you're bringing all that trauma back into the buildings. So what can we do now? How can we start building connections with students and opening up to hear more about them? How to create environments where they can talk to each other, not just on the surface. Let's hear about them, how life is going. Tell us more about your identity, because we have the beautiful part about our country and our schools. We have kids from so many different backgrounds, so many different stories of how this is going to impact them. Let's start helping them heal through talking about that narrative, that trauma. And then we can hear some of the stories like, dang, I hear what's going on with you. You want to talk more about that? How can we start finding spaces to say, hey, here's what I do when I feel really stressed out, when I'm at home all day? Or then we can start giving them those tools, because they're coming back to our buildings in person. So how can we start building them up now before they come back? Because not only that, we're going to be stretched out when they do come back and having to be asked to do all these teams, to re-entry team and all that. So if we can start establishing these relationships with students, say, hey, let's have time every week, just 10 minutes. Let's have a time to check in and connect. How are things really going at home? Tell me more about that. Because instead of, hey, we're sorry, why aren't you passing that class? What's going on? You build the relationship and hear what they're really going through. I think that's our role right now. As this pandemic starts to shift, and we hope the vaccine works and helps out, understand where students are feeling, what trauma they've had, who have they lost, how are meals going? So then that way, when they come back to school, you say, oh yeah, I remember we built a relationship during the pandemic, and I found a time to connect with you. What's the best way for us to keep this going? That's our power right now. Because when we come back to schools, kids they'll trust us. They'll be like, oh yeah, I remember we talked during the pandemic, you helped me through. So that's our role. We can help kids through this really challenging time. Sometimes they just want someone to talk to. And so we can be leaders in helping our other staff members have those skills. How can you tie that into other core areas where they're talking about their identity or how they're feeling today, or in touch with their breathing exercises so they can calm if they're feeling stressed at home? That's our power as school counselors. So we have tools. Let's start using them.
That is so important, and I really appreciate your bringing that up. And I want to tie this into a question that came in the Q&A while we've been talking, which is just how have you found, or what strategies have you found that work to help you reach these kids that maybe are pulling back a bit? So like it's one thing to be able to offer yourself as a person that cares, but if you're not getting that response, if you're leaving messages and nobody's calling you back, or you're sending emails and nobody's responding. Like, do you have any suggestions for folks out there for how they can really break through? It's a tough question.
I mean, I think one of those is really, doing a program evaluation and, looking at all the multimodality ways you are trying to reach out and communicate. Like, it can't just be through email. So, making sure that you're trying to make those phone calls, trying to do the emails, but also, have different teachers, and actually find the ones that are reaching out and maybe breaking through, because sometimes it might be a specific teacher that's actually getting a hold of them. And so leveraging those different relationships and really knowing who's on that care team, who's actually having an impact, and breaking through to be able to have those communications. And, that's just kind of like on an individual level, but then on the global level, I think about, and maybe it's less about trying to break through the communication, but really changing up how we do things. And so for us, the post-secondary college visits, instead of having somebody go to 6 different schools, now we're having virtual ones. I mean, we've had some wild success there with over 100 students logged on, and, giving out free t-shirts and using free t-shirts to get them to come there. And, just leveraging different ways to do our program and really evaluating our program and doing an audit to see, are we trying everything, and are we using every mode possible to really reach out and communicate?
Yeah, I think, and I'll just throw in one idea too, which is to remind yourself that just because somebody didn't respond to a message doesn't mean that they didn't get the message. And it doesn't mean that they didn't appreciate the message. Sometimes repetition is actually really helpful, just being able to hear from somebody a couple of times. But, just curious if others have any other thoughts as well.
So with us being remote, it's really interesting how students' priorities have changed, particularly those who are able to get employment, where their priority now is work. And so we have students now where one of the teachers like, well, wait a minute, I just saw them at Walmart. So our principal's like, I'm going to Walmart tomorrow, right? And that's how we figured out how to get to the student, because every time we went and did a home visit, they weren't there. And then finally somebody was like, yeah, I was at Walmart and they're one of the cashiers. And we're like, well, hot damn, we're going to go to Walmart. And guess what? That student was at Walmart. Principal Cohen had that conversation. And then finally the students started logging back into their Zoom classes. But it takes you, I think as a school, the counselor has to help the building administrator set those priorities and goals, because if building relationships isn't your priority and it's about content, you have a chance to redo that this January. Like you get a do-over, right? To help build those relationships, because that way you can zoom into that class and the teacher's like, man, the student hasn't been here, but then someone knows where that student is. And then that's how you figure that out. But until the teachers realize that our number one priority was about building relationships and getting to know students more than what their grade was, that was really hard for our school. It was a huge culture shift where they were like, wait a minute, the first 2 weeks, you don't want me to cover content? You mean you want me to do these activities in class? Really? Okay. And then all of a sudden, all these emails started coming in to the building principal being like, you won't believe what happened in my class today. And it worked, because they didn't believe that was really what it needed to take this fall semester. And so I think, we all have a chance to redo that again this spring semester, but it is true. Like what Matt was saying, like if plan A doesn't work, then you got to go to plan B. And I think Derek, you and I brought that up in our conversation a couple of days ago, where it's like, well, just because the email and the phone call didn't work, you can't stop there.
Yeah.
Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah.
Yes, I do, because now we have to be honest with ourselves as school counselors. And I haven't been in a building as a counselor in about a year, but I remember you just know it does become fatigue where you're tired. We're like, man, I've been calling this to, and you might have times where you got to check your bias where you're like, you know what, they didn't answer. Never mind, they're not going to answer. We're turning into telemarketers now as school counselors. How many times have you called them? And it is a grind. And I know that's different for a lot of school counselors. A lot. How many numbers haven't worked? It is a challenge. And I know when we're supporting counselors here in Minneapolis, that is part of the I think finding joy in that. Like, hey, I gave that my attempt. I'm trying to get a hold of them. I know some educators have been bold, and I would and done home visits, put the mask on and just gone and say, hey, I wanted to just check in. We hadn't heard from you. What's the best way to contact? I just want to say, and I think even if you do a home visit, don't even bring up grades. Don't even talk about it. Just say, I'm just happy to see you. You're alive. I'm glad you're surviving. How are you doing? That's all I wanted to do is make sure you're okay. I care about, I actually missed you. How are you doing? I see your hair's growing. You got fro down. Like, joke with them, get to know them. And then say, hey, how about this? I wanted to see how you're doing maybe next week. What's the best way to get a hold of you? Nothing academic, because that's transactional. If you say, oh, well, tell me now about your, build the relationship. And the thing is, students see through it. We do as adults. We know when someone's just trying to get something. But if you show up, even if it's a call, and say, hey, how are you doing? That's going to go so far. And they remember that, especially because we're all in a place of trauma. So anyone that's helping you right now, you remember, oh yeah, I remember that person helped me when I was going through a lot during the pandemic. So that's the role we play. It's exciting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, one of our favorite quotes around here, comes from a child psychologist at Yale who talked about, without meaningful relationships, no significant learning can occur. And it's a truism. It has been, but it's never been clearer, I think, than it is right now. I know we've spent a lot of our time on ways in which the current environment has been challenging, but, we even had some conversation last week about ways in which the current environment has just changed things up that might actually be a little bit better, like some issues that you're not seeing as much of that you were seeing before the pandemic. And maybe that's making space or time for other things. So I just wondered if you could reflect a little bit on maybe ways in which things have changed for the better.
I am the one that kind of brought this up last week, so I'll get started. And what I said was, remember, we are 2 days face-to-face, 3 days virtual. So, and when the students are on campus, the academic time is very protected, very valuable. We want them in class. Of course, we want them in class. We want them ready to learn in class. But because teachers are only seeing them 2 days a week and students aren't really seeing each other like they have, at any time our school is a third full. So class sizes are smaller, which gives the teachers a lot more opportunities to create the connections when the students are here, albeit just 2 days a week. But we have not seen the typical ninth grade. Kat will understand. The typical ninth grade, my friend was mean to me and now she doesn't like me anymore. That, for the first time in my office, was last week, and it is December. So usually that's at the second week of August that we would see that. So that has been, and I don't know if that's a positive or a negative, but it just has not come to the surface as quickly as it would have before if the students had been in class every day of the week with a class of 30 students. So that's positive. I also would like to say the smaller, it's almost like, we call them cohorts. It's like the cohort is a smaller family now. And that's a nice feel when it's a different feel for us because, all together we're 2,200 and then a cohort is a third of that. So that's been kind of nice as well, just to be able to have more room, more ability to be heard, more ability to get questions answered in class. That's been an unintended happiness of only being able to come 2 days a week.
I can speak with us. We've switched to an all block schedule with all our buildings. Usually one of our 7 schools was blocked before, and now all of them are. And so I think what we've seen is that we're actually having some dedicated space in there for student service interventions and office hours, some universal time. And so I think we're seeing the power of that is making that a priority and having that really specified and carved out is really allowing, clinicians to be very prescriptive and intentional how they use that time. In addition, I also think with this flex learning, we've learned that it can be done differently. When you look at the 7 or 8 period day, in a row, and you go into class and you see the rows of desks, and that's how it was 100 years ago. And I think we're seeing that we can do education differently. Now, do we want to do it all this way? I don't think so. But I think there's some power in understanding that, students aren't going to go through a college class without taking something online or doing something virtually. And so how do we walk away from this and still keep some of these aspects? Because I think there is some power and some skills there that students can have that they take forward with them.
I'd say, and I always got to give you guys context because I'm in Minneapolis. And so we had George Floyd happen within 0.4 miles of 2 of our schools. And so for us, in the pandemic, you couldn't escape it. You had to talk about race and equity and racism. And so I'd say that is one of the biggest plus. And sad to even say that it had to happen that way, but where now it's not awkward or uncomfortable. Oh, it's not where it gets put out there. So that's one thing where I think has been really nice to be able to talk about it with our data and seeing the gaps. But the other thing that I really think is important is education started to finally catch up with technology. Because had you asked me a year ago to hop on a Zoom or set one up, oh my goodness, I wouldn't know how to do it. I would have been like, hey, can someone help me, please? And so look at us now, doing it all the time. And we're teaching students that skill and they're learning it. And that's one of the things where we can say, hey, our world is transforming. How can we help you develop the skill of, and giving them those college and career readiness skills, because they don't have a bell at home to say, hey, get to class. Now they got to do it on their own. Oh, shoot, let me set my alarm. When's my next class? So those are skills we're helping them with. So see the joy in that and helping them know how to balance their day. And when are you going to take a break? Are your eyes getting tired? There's grown adults that have Zoom fatigue as well. So having those conversations. So I think those are things we can think about as positives of we're getting them ready for the world. And who knows how different. Heck, you might be able to teleport to people in the future. I don't know. And so, good, they'll be teaching us how to use that. But technology is moving. And so we finally caught up because school had always been brick and mortar. We just never broke out of that. And so look at us now. And companies are glad for it. Downtown Minneapolis is a ghost town. But my friends who work corporate, they're like, we're fine. We're working from home. And well, and so for them, their day-to-day work is, they're like, this is great. So I think it's helping our students learn how to, and it opens them up to the world. When are we going to start having them do meetings and classes with kids from other parts of the country? Oh my goodness. Why wouldn't we do that? Say, hey, let's find a school in another part of the country and see what's it like for them during the pandemic. What advice do you have for them? Let's connect. This is the world's in our hand now to connect. And it's super cool if we see it from that perspective. You know how many students would be like, I want to, hey, find a school in Chicago. Let's see how the kids in the Chicago area are doing. I'd be like, cool, yeah, let's find out. Let's ask them. Because the world's becoming so much more global citizens. So how can we open up their minds, especially if you're in a town that doesn't have a lot of diversity? You have no excuse now. You're one click away from a student of color or a colleague of color. So that's awesome. How can we utilize that? So I find that exciting because I've met people around. I've never met y'all in real life. Kat, I've seen you on here so many times, and it's cool. It's like, that's how we're leveraging technology to move forward. Why wouldn't we put that on our kids? And the funny thing is, the kids in the video game community, they're like, we're already here. I talk to people around the country all the time. This is what I was doing anyways. And so they transitioned amazing. They're like, yep, I'll do my homework. I'm playing video games on here, but I'll do my homework. And so and I love that. I'm like, man, you got this thing down. But imagine that. So that's another way we can help our students grow, because there's no way they can leave high school now and say it's on us. We can give them an opportunity to meet someone and hear about their experiences from a different background and culture, because we can set that up. Let's start doing that. That's how we make some changes in our education system. So I hope we use this technology to our advantage.
That's such a great point. And I think, the first stage, right, when you get new technologies, you try to figure out how can I replicate what I was doing before now with this technology. But once you get past that, it's an opportunity to think, what can I do now that I couldn't do before? And I think that's where you're getting at, Derek, which is really, really encouraging. I know we're getting some questions about academics, and I want to come back to academics in just a minute. But before we go on to that, I did want to ask one question, because we talked a little bit before about the trauma that people are facing and the ways in which some of you are being called upon as experts as counselors for other members of staff as well as for students. We know there's going to be lots of mental health issues that people are going to bring back to school with them that they're dealing with now, in some cases at home. And so, I thought I'd pick specifically on Anna because somehow in the midst of all of this, you had an opportunity to publish a book, Managing Anxiety in School Settings, which is available now on Amazon and elsewhere. I'm looking forward to getting my copy and encourage other folks to do the same. But anything we can do to get kids and keep kids and staff from reaching that breaking point that we're trying to avoid.
And if I knew the answer to that, because I know that we had talked earlier, is we all are very fatigued. We all have our plates running over, us students, everyone. And the Lord knew not to give me small children during a pandemic, because I don't know how those parents are doing that, doing this all day and then taking care, and then educating your own. Oh, Derek, I don't know how you're doing it. Bless you. The Lord loves you. He knew I couldn't handle that.
She goes to daycare most days too, but man, the stress you feel from it, and she's 1.5. You're right. Thank you for sharing.
Cannot imagine. But I have seen some wonderful things online that people have created just to kind of help. A lot of schools have online calming rooms. Where students can log on and go into different places and either watch something calming or do something calming, maybe some meditation, maybe some deep breathing. Those are super easy to set up. And if you don't want to set it up, you can just hook onto someone else's. Those have been really very, very useful. I've also seen where people will have drop-ins, like if a student or students want to come and drop into your Zoom and on different topics, but also on meditation. We'll have an open meditation from 11 to 11:20. Here's the Zoom link, drop in. That would be another way to keep them connected, but also to help them with the anxiety that they're feeling. At my school, we have a time, we're on a block schedule too, Matt, and we have a time carved out for some connection time. And on Fridays, when no students are on our campus, our faculty has that time together as a faculty. So we have little faculty groups, and that's where we're teaching them and learning as faculty a lot of different stress reduction strategies. So because the adults need it A, and the students need it B, because if the adults in your building aren't okay, then the students are not going to be okay. So there's a lot of wonderful things out there when you start looking, but I'll be the first one to tell you, sometimes I don't have time to look. I'm running from one thing to the next, and I tell people, if you don't email it to me or write it down and give it to me, it'll be gone before I leave you, because there's just so much coming at us. But when you have a moment to look and identify these opportunities for students that you can have on demand for them on your website, there's some great things out there.
I'd like to add something to that. My night job is a trauma specialist. And so I see people clinically for trauma. And what I'm finding here, and this is global. At first, I thought it was the first couple of people, but it's actually global. And what's happening is there's some unprocessed past traumas. And I mean, I have adults coming in, processing being bullied as a kid that they thought they have processed. They thought it was all gone. And what's happening is, because the present day circumstances, if you think of it like a pressure cooker, because this is raised up so much, it's actually pulling at some past experiences that have never been processed. And so from a clinical perspective, I share with counselors, don't be surprised if you say, hey, what other time have you felt like this? Or where do you think this has come from? You'll be surprised if some other things come up that are totally unrelated to present day, but are definitely tied to the feeling when they once felt that before. And it is amazing. I promise you, someone comes in and is like, oh, I've never experienced trauma. And I start poking around a little bit and I start asking questions, and it's like, oh, I'm fine with that. And then, but when we really get to it, that's actually what's bubbling up right now. And so I love present day strategies, but I also, my passion is digging around in the past and kind of seeing what's still there that maybe needs to be worked on. And so I just wanted to bring that up there from a clinical perspective.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you. So as promised, I do want to go back to this question of academics a little bit, because we've got a question in the chat. I'm trying to blend it with a few of the comments that I had noted here as well to ask about, which is, how do we get a shared sense of what expectations should be for students? Like, at the end of the day, it is important. There's a reason why we teach the core subjects that we teach in schools. There's a reason why we have academic expectations, or had academic expectations before the pandemic. And now a lot of that's feeling very difficult to achieve. And I want to tie this into, part of a conversation we had last week. And Kat, you had brought up, how important it was that administrators and state education officials kind of understand the reality on the ground. And I feel like that intersects with this question about what we can reasonably expect of students in the current environment. So I'm just curious, what have you found that's working in terms of getting administrators to understand today's reality, and how that may cause us to think differently about some of the expectations or requirements that we've had, whether it be assessment or, other expectations?
And I think that's a really interesting question, because I think counselors all the time, many times, are not at the table or in the room when these conversations are happening. And I just was fortunate enough to be in a conversation with a State Department conversation. And I was one of two practicing educators, where there was about a committee of 40 people who are making decisions on access and equity, social justice, academic, like all kinds of things. And I was like, have you been in a Zoom classroom at all, or talked to anybody in education that's doing this remotely right now? Because it was I think they were just super humbled by what is happening in the trenches. And I think that goes again to, like, we have to be careful about sharing the positives and the negatives, the reality of what is happening. And I think it's really interesting about what we're all talking about, because why haven't we made room for what we say is really important? If we think social emotional learning and college and career readiness is really important, then why in America have we not addressed that systemically? Right? Because we could go and change the graduation requirements and the core standards and all of these things, but I don't think anybody's really had the courage to say, let's do it. Let's really investigate to see what it looks like. And I think that's been part of the trouble, right? With all of us, we're like, oh, we got to do these college and career ready lessons, or we got to try to figure out the FAFSA, and where can we fit that in? Could you imagine if someone said, well, we need to teach algebra, where can we fit that in? I mean, no one says it like that. And so I think when we really talk about the overall whole child, it is academics, but it's also social emotional, and it's also college and career readiness. Like, all of us have pieces of that within us as we are as adults now. And I think those student stories really help tell that story. That's what we have been successful as our future, or like our current grads and our future students who are graduating. They're like, hey, high school was great, but I really wish I could have had, or I wish I would have. And if for a building administrator to be like, oh, wow, that is really interesting, tell me more about that. It gives a different perspective than Cat Pastor School counselor saying, hey, we need to change some things. But it's having those discussions. And I think Matt brought that up tonight too, about talking about how can we do things differently than we did 100 years ago. And talking about it and doing it, I think, are two different things. And I'm waiting for someone to have that courage to say, okay, now's the time. Let's really revamp what we do with our education system in America. And what do our students really need to know to be successful in their life choices after they move on from elementary, middle, and high school?
I'll just add, I don't know if I have as much profound words to say as Kat, but we did just spend an entire day talking about this as well yesterday. And it was, is a 0 the same thing as a 50? When you fail a student, is a 50 the same thing as a 0? Because a 0 means you've done nothing. But a 50 says you got here. And so how do we look at this big, because it really is a systemic issue, right? A 0 and a 50, then they fail, but then this other half of the work they do here. So how do we turn the whole grading system on its head to really reflect that, guess what, if a student is getting, B's on a test and showing mastery, but like maybe hasn't done the homework, throw the homework grade out and just give them the B because they're showing mastery. And if they've gotten B's on all their homework and they're doing that, let's spin this around a little bit. And I think it's taken a pandemic to really look at how can we, look at from a ethically standpoint of grading practices, but like, how do we really spin this so it is, it's equitable for all students?
Yeah. And you mentioned this question of how we make this equitable for all students. We have a problem where we were coming into a situation where it wasn't equitable for students before. And now we're facing this pandemic and we're thinking about, okay, so we have this disproportionate impact. And Derek, you made this point earlier. We have communities where the access to technology, the access to additional help, the parents' ability to take time away from their jobs is just very different from other parts of the same city, the same zip code. And when you think about getting to the other side, you will have students for whom essentially they've kept up with all of the sort of academic expectations through that entire time. It's just like, just give me more. And then you're going to have other students that have gotten, were struggling before and haven't had anything, in the last 6 months to really help move the ball forward. So I'm just interested in how you think about taking this opportunity where we're now we're seeing this massive social justice crisis in front of us that's been exacerbated by this environment that we're facing. But how do we make sure that we correct for that, and we build back something on the other end of it that's going to be better for all of us?
I really do think it starts with understanding our students and their real life experience. And I say this because I think it became so apparent during this pandemic around the systemic incidents that have led to this. So I say that in terms of, in our large school district in Minneapolis, we have, and not even pandemic related, let's just say we said everyone has to do school from home, not even thrown in the pandemic, based on students who have privilege or more socioeconomic advantages, those students are doing just fine. Some of them are like, I love online school. And so knowing that we do have students that are in that, and we're all going on the same journey of we're all navigating the pandemic, but some people are navigating it with so many other tools to stay afloat. And so understanding how our families are living. And so we looked at the data here in even Minneapolis proper around the students whose families reported that they're not, 34% of families of color said, you know what, we're not even sure we have enough money for our meals for the rest of the month. And there's some families, even mine, I have a pantry full of food. And I think getting to some of those real issues of goodness, there's systemic things going on that's pushing up against our families, jobs, who's the most underemployed people right now, knowing how they're taking on this pandemic. So I think being aware of what that household could look like, understand what that feels like. I think that's the beginning, and acknowledging ourselves, like, what areas do I need to grow in so that I can understand what life would look like if I had a home that had more than one family living in it, where we didn't know what our next meal was going to look like. Because there's a lot of people in our country and a lot of families that we support and serve who don't have the same type of environment and privileges that we have. And it's been really weighing on my heart that we need to be aware of that, because we're all well-educated folks that have probably decent enough salaries to take care of our families and not worry where our next meal is coming from. Imagine trying to take care of your kids and family, and you're living in a complex where COVID is rampant. And then you're getting a call from the school saying, hey, your kid didn't pass their classes. We're trying to figure out what we're going to eat. And so we can't have that disconnect around someone else's reality. So I really think our humility is the starting point to realize life doesn't look like this for everyone else. So that's why I'm really trying to sit in.
That's such an important point. We are coming up on the top of the hour. We've got just 5 minutes left, I want to just ask a lightning round question here to think about, when we came into the pandemic in March, it caught a lot of us off guard, all of us really off guard. And schools had to rethink instructional models and get through to the end of the year. But now we've been in this reality for 8 or 9 months. We have a clear vision about what's happening now. May even have a little bit more perspective on what happens next. So where can counselors in particular help us see the future, and where can we start to forecast things that we're going to need to do, and where we're going to need extra capacity in a couple months because of issues that we've been going through for the last several? Any thoughts?
I think it's the theme tonight has been connectedness. We have got to have the students feel connected to the school. They need to feel like they belong and that they have someone they can talk to. So when they do come back, it's scary. I mean, I've watched 2 sets of cohorts come back, and they're a little scared when they walk in the door. So having them feel safe, having them feel supported, and having them feel like they belong to that school, I think it's what we need to be. It's what we need to cultivate for when everyone does come back.
Along with that, I think that we need to realize that just because we start a new school year next fall, that all this didn't happen. We might not be ready for the fallout of what has occurred in our personal lives and then in our school lives. But right now, budgets are being decided for next year. Positions are being decided for next year. FTE is being decided for next year. And school counselors with a data-informed process help say, this is where we need to spend our money. We were a skeleton crew this past fall, and we made it work, but it wasn't equitable for everyone. And if we're really about equity and access, then we really need to be serving all students. And our school district or our school building, we need to shift our funds, and we need to put money in these types of positions or resources so that we can really service all students at our schools. That's where I'm at right now, because I know that our enrollment numbers dropped this year. So I'm worried about our funding for next year, which means we're going to have cuts. So we have to be proactive, and school counselors have to start sharing that data narrative now.
What you shared, you spoke directly to me, Kat, and I thank you. I already was like, I'm going to email you after this, because that is so true. We have to show the need for us as school counselors to help. And Anna shared the same thing, that connectiveness. That's what students need. They need someone to just talk to them and say, I hear you. I see what's going on. This is hard. And the district I'm in, same thing, is where our enrollment potentially could be declining. And not only that, we're bringing in students and families that have gone through the hardest part of COVID, whether the most lost, the most transmission, getting COVID. So understanding all those social emotional needs, you can't reduce the position, because we want to, as school counselors and our mental health teams, we want to tend to that, because it's going to be even higher. Are you kidding me? And so not only that, the gaps are going to be wider, unfortunately. So how can we tend to those students who COVID hit them even harder academically? And so those are the key things I think we really need to focus. And I love what you said, how you got to shift the funding then. Because if your funding is going to a pre-COVID style model, and you're not aware of how COVID's changed, you got to get out of the fog and say, all right, I know this is going to be weird or different, but we're going to put funding towards checking in with students, social emotional counselors, social workers, therapists. We're going to do that. And they're focusing on building relationships, checking in with students, especially the most vulnerable. So I hope districts out there are listening, because it's going to be a shift. It's going to be awkward, but you have to do something different. I hope they do. So Kat, I'm going to be emailing you, because that was huge. Thanks.
You guys were all terrific. I want to thank you very much for the time that you put in, both preparing, giving some thought to the topics for today. I want to thank our viewers on both Facebook Live and on Zoom. So, this is obviously a very challenging time, but hopefully you're leaving tonight with also some messages of hope that you can take back to your own work. And so thank you for everything that you do on behalf of kids. Please visit Intellispark.com to learn more about our work and sign up for your free account. And don't forget to check out School Counselor Central on Facebook, which is a terrific community with more than 50,000 school counselors committed to sharing best practices, supporting one another. So we hope to see you online at a future event. And until then, take care.